One of the cool things about moving to a full-frame camera for me is that now I can use my father's vintage Minolta lenses, and they are what they are. So I can actually do this with his 28mm lens, and I'm close enough to the camera where I can manually focus myself and get this cool look out of this lens. And I don't have to do the math and try to figure it out. And you know, on my APS-C camera, this 28mm is a 42mm, so I had to be further back. And so I couldn't really use it in that way. Now I used it in other ways. And I also have a 50mm of his, so it's actually 50mm on this camera, so that's kind of cool. That's been fun to kind of recalibrate my mind to think that the focal length of a lens is actually what it is on a full frame camera, as opposed to an APS-C where, like I said, you got to do the math. So anyway, I'm here today because I have been flying all over the place looking for the final locations for my film that I'm about to shoot. And I think I've kind of nailed down the places that I'm going to use. There's only 3 locations in the entire film. And it's gotten me to thinking about safety. Because some of the stuff that I plan on doing in this film, I definitely shouldn't do it on my own. And I'm not going to do it on my own. I've already reached out to some people, so I'm going to get help. Excuse me. But, you know, it got me thinking, like, you know, artists are kind of crazy sometimes, you know? Like, if you're really, truly intent upon telling your story as well as you can, like, in the way that you really want to tell it, you know, if you really think that there's a certain kind of journey that you want to express to people, to really have them take this ride that you want them to go on, to experience the story that you're trying to share with them, you have to be willing to sometimes put yourself in some slightly precarious situations. And so it got me thinking, like, that's kind of interesting, because do we do that as artists for ourselves or for the audience? And I think it's both, because I think, you know, obviously we have a big responsibility to the audience. You know, anybody who's nice enough to come pay and see our play or our film or a concert or whatever. But also, you know, the whole thing, at least for me, is that the journey is equally as important as getting to create this beautiful shared experience with the audience. And don't get me wrong, I mean, for me personally, I would say some of the best experiences of my life, not some of, the best experiences of my life have been getting on a stage and performing in front of a big audience, or even a small audience sometimes. Getting up there and exchanging, you know, going back and forth with an audience, you know, creating a world that we're in together. You know, even if I'm off on my own, you know, in some world that I'm not really, you know, the audience is not a part of this world, they're observing the world, we're still in the space together. We're sharing the space, we're sharing this amazing happening, you know, this coming together. And it's the performer and it's the audience, and it's 2 different perspectives, but it's together, it's community. You know, in my opinion, theater is like the ultimate in community, even film. You know, people gathering, like, you know, like I said in my last video, my favorite movie of all time is Cinema Paradiso. And Cinema Paradiso is actually about a cinema, an old movie house in a small town in Italy that was the center of that community. You know, it brought people together. People came together at this movie theater to share these stories, you know, to share receiving the stories. And so, like theater, you know, it's kind of like having a town square and telling a story. It's really a beautiful a beautiful human thing to bring people into the same space and share art, you know, and you know, for me, I know, you know, like to allow people to, or to enable people, well, not enable, but to kind of push people to imagine, to get out of their own head and get somewhere else, you know, and just, you know, kind of travel to another place for a short amount of time, you know, anywhere from, you know, 5 minutes if it's a song, 10 minutes if it's a poem, 2 hours if it's a play, 2.5 hours, a film, a play, whatever. 10 seconds if it's a painting. I think it's a great gift for the performer and for the audience member to, you know, kind of go to another consciousness and to kind of raise the level of spirituality in a way by experiencing something that is surreal, you know, not necessarily tangibly real, but something that is from our imagination, from our dreams, you know, from our spirits and souls, that we create something that is different than we can just do here with our physical bodies. I mean, that's how I look at art. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, I've been using this Panasonic S5 camera now for the past couple of weeks, and it's interesting because what's been happening to me is that I find myself moving away from my Sony a6400, the camera I've been using for the last couple of years. And I didn't think that was going to happen. I really thought that I would be using both of these. You know, like I thought I'm going to use the Panasonic S5 for certain situations like low light and things like that, and keep using my Sony for other things because it's lighter and, you know, it's got advantages. It's got a further reach because it's APS-C, so I can get closer to faraway subjects if I don't have, you know, the lenses that would enable me to do that with this camera. But I have to say that, first of all, full frame is a real thing for me. Like, it really does look different, and I do like to not have to think about, you know, the math of lenses, and that, you know, this is allowing me to just have what I have, you know, without trying to figure it out. And also, this camera is just packed with creative tools that are so helpful in making my art, you know, just and I mean like camera tools, like, you know, manual focus assisting and leveling options to help me make sure that my frame is level. Like, it's got a lot of stuff that my Sony camera doesn't have. And so I'm really, really appreciating that and having fun with that. Also, the colors are much different. It's got a different personality, and I find that I really enjoy the personality of this camera. It just looks different. But, you know, once I get in post-production, I can match the images from both cameras, but what comes out of this camera naturally is a lot different. Like right now, I'm using the natural picture profile. You know, I shoot usually in Vlog, so I can, you know, kind of mess with it afterwards. I have, you know, much more dynamic range, and I can push the colors, and I can, you know, have more creative options to change the image if I want to. When I'm using just a natural picture profile, it's kind of baked into the image, and it's harder for me to change it. And actually, as I'm about to embark on this film, I have to make a decision, what picture profile am I going to shoot in? Because I'm not going to hire a colorist, and I don't know if I want to spend a year, you know, correcting the colors and having to go into post-production, because when you use Vlog, you have to then commit to go into post-production, because Vlog is a very flat image, so it doesn't look like correct. It looks wrong. But it's actually the best starting place for somebody who wants to get really creative with the image in post-production. But there's nothing wrong with having a picture profile where you like the way it looks. You know, you like the character, you like the personality of the image, and you just commit to that for the film, and then you don't have to do much post-production, like maybe just fix your highlights and your shadows and just, you know, maybe add some, you know, some just little minor details here and there. But overall, I think I'm going to choose a picture profile that gives me a little bit of flexibility, but also doesn't force me to have to, color correct and color grade every single frame of the film, because I think this film is going to wind up being another 2-hour film. So yeah, it's just been really interesting for me and a great learning experience, coming from originally from my phone, which I've talked about ad nauseum, about, creating the center of distance on my phone. And then I bought an a6400, which was my first proper camera that I've ever owned on my own, ever. And learned so much over the last couple of years using that camera. And now I'm using this camera. And now I'm kind of beyond the basics of white balance and ISO and exposure and framing and all that. Like, I know what I'm doing now. But now this camera is giving me the option to think about maybe shooting in anamorphic mode, which is a kind of a wider, more cinematic, perspective, if I can get anamorphic lenses. And this camera has that internally. It also has more color depth, it has more capability than my Sony. So if I want to shoot in log and I want to really be more creative with the colors, I can do that with this camera. And also basically what it's doing is giving me the opportunity to learn how to do that. So even if I don't use it for this next film, which is, this is the end for me, I'm practicing with it every day. Like, I have shot every day since I've gotten this camera. I think I mentioned in the last video that I haven't left my apartment ever without a camera since I bought the a6400. And once I got this one, I just switched this into my camera bag, and I've been running around with the Panasonic S5 every day, practicing with this and learning. And so, yeah, that's what I've been thinking about. I found these locations. I've reached out for some help. I've gotten it, enthusiastically, which makes me feel really good and honored. Had me thinking about what we do as artists and sharing our work, and what we give to the audience, what the audience gives us, and how I feel responsible to the audience, but I also feel responsible to me, because for me, the making of the project, the thinking about it, the imagination, the writing, the planning, the actual doing, it's all equally as exciting and fulfilling as the actual performance or the finished film. The performance in the case of live theater, or bringing it to screen, the finished product of a film. The whole thing is equally as exciting and meaningful for me. I mean, I'm not speaking for anybody else, I'm just speaking for myself, but that's how I feel about it. So I've been thinking a lot about that. I've been thinking about the opportunity of using this camera and how grateful I am to have it, and how I've already learned so much in the last couple of weeks just from working with a camera that has much more capability than the one that I've had. But it also makes me appreciate the one that I had, because I'm like, that camera, it's a small kind of basic camera, but on the other hand, it's an incredibly powerful camera. It's got incredible dynamic range. It's got amazing autofocus. It's got great colors. It's got a lot of picture profiles. It's got pro features, but this camera has more pro features. And it's also a different perspective, because that's an APS-C crop sensor camera. This is a full frame camera. So it's literally a different visual perspective, but it's also a different perspective in terms of, suddenly I have different ergonomics, different buttons. The whole thing physically is different than the other camera, a different menu system, different screen, different everything. It sounds different, it looks different, so another great learning experience for me. And by the way, even though I'm manually focusing right now because I'm using my father's old lens, the autofocus on this camera has been amazing. Like, honestly, I don't really understand why people complain about it. I don't know, maybe I don't shoot in a way that you need that kind of continuous autofocus. Like, I guess maybe if you shoot, sports or really incredibly fast-moving action all the time, where you're relying on autofocus, I guess then it might make a difference. But for stuff like this, or for making a narrative film where you have everything kind of mapped out and you actually want to use manual focus, but the you know, that doesn't make a difference, but the autofocus on this camera, I find, has been amazing. Really no different than the Sony for what I do. So I have zero complaints. I mean, I've been so happy with it. I'm just trying to wait for the right time. I want to get one more lens. I have the, I'm not using now, but I have the 20-60 Panasonic kit lens. And I have the 50mm 1.8 Panasonic lens. And I think I want to get the 24mm f1.8 because the 50 is kind of like a portrait lens, you know, it's kind of close in. Gives me a little bit decent reach, but it's not good for this kind of stuff close up. 24mm is very wide, and it gives me the perspective of what a 16mm was on my Sony, and probably the most popular lens that people use on an APS-C Sony camera is the Sigma 16mm f1.4. And so if I can get the 24 Panasonic lens, I'll have the same perspective visually that I had with my 16mm, which I used for most of my YouTube stuff and most of my vlogging type of stuff. Although I also used my 12mm Samyang lens a lot, even though it's manual, but I use that because that's really wide and I can get really close to the camera, but it's kind of distorted. This lens is not really distorted that much. Not at all, really. You know, this is a 28mm that I'm using right here, f2.8 Minolta. So anyway, I'm going to end this by saying that this film that I'm getting ready to work on, This Is the End for Me, is a very intense, dark kind of film in a lot of ways. But it's also a very joyful film in other ways. And that's what I'm trying to get across. I'm honoring a couple of friends of mine who I lost over the last few years in this film. And I'm kind of a, I don't know, I guess maybe a method actor, people would say, where I really kind of immerse myself in the feeling, the emotion, the spirit of the soul of the story that I'm doing. And I'm starting to feel it, you know, as I've spent time at this last location that I found the other day. It's a place that I've been looking at for 2 years, basically. And I finally went there the other day and I spent some time there, and I started to really feel the weight of what I'm doing. And so it's starting to affect my whole life. And I know it's going to affect me for the duration of this project, because not necessarily because I feel like I have to do that. It's just that's the way it works out for me. You know, I get that involved. And I don't have many other distractions in my life other than trying to survive. But I don't have a family, I don't have kids, I don't have any of that kind of stuff. So I can just focus on what I'm doing, which is like pure love for me. Like I love it, I appreciate it. I'm in complete gratitude all the time for doing it. But it's also kind of not very, it's not exactly the most balanced life, I'll say, which I don't necessarily think is very healthy, and I'm very cognizant of that. But I'm also very, very conscious of my well-being and my health, my wellness. And in this case, as I'm getting older and more experienced with this work, I'm not going to be as reckless as I've been in the past. I've been quite reckless. I mean, I have hurt myself pretty bad in certain theater performances that I've done. I almost died one night on stage, actually, because I allowed myself to just ground my body down to nothing. And my adrenals were just completely shot, and I was kind of exhausted. And I was performing a show that was like incredibly high energy, about a very, very heavy, you know, it was about racism, white privilege, gentrification, you know, misogyny. It was about a lot of heavy subjects. It was motivated by the Sean Bell shooting in 2006. And actually the Bell family saw that play a number of times. You know, I became good friends with the Bell family. Mr. and Mrs. Bell have been incredibly supportive of me. And that particular night I had a full theater, big theater. a place called Pregones in the Bronx, and I had a residency there at the time, and I literally almost passed out on stage. I had to walk off the stage. Fortunately for me, I had some musicians on stage with me that night, which was rare for me. Usually I'm just on stage all by myself. But that night I had some musicians, and so I told them to just keep playing, and I went backstage for like 20 minutes just to get myself together, and I finished the show. I still had an hour to go. But anyway, I realized that I did that to myself. You know, like I felt that happening during the process. I was kind of overworked. I wasn't getting a lot of help with the process at that time. You know, my director lived in San Diego, so I was in New York by myself, working with these musicians, trying to get everything together. And it was very, very difficult, and I wore myself down. And so, you know, I had a successful run. You know, we had great shows, we had great audiences, but it was dangerous. You know, I wound up in the ER after that show. And so I'm trying to be very aware. I once cut up my hand pretty bad in a show because I was using a broken down old scaffold, and all these pieces of metal shards were coming off the scaffold because it was, you know, old and worn. And I got a really bad infection in my hand one night. I fell off the scaffold once because one of the pieces of the platform broke, and I fell, and I almost broke my hip. You know, and that happened because I didn't really check it before I did it. So, yeah, this is the end for me. This next film that I'm working on now has some really potentially dangerous scenes in it that I have to be really aware of. So I am doing that and paying attention to that. But I'm still going to be immersed in the spirit of the story. I'm just going to be careful about not killing myself. And I'm so excited to start shooting, and so excited to get in the process and work with Steve Peckman on the music and some other musicians as well on the score, and some collaborators who are going to help me shoot a couple of these scenes. My friend Kelly, a New York City police officer, is going to help me with one of these scenes. So I'm really so excited. And so I guess this video is kind of all over the place, but that's what I wanted to share today. And thank you so much for watching. And yeah, I'm in love with this Panasonic Lumix S5, my first full-frame camera. The possibilities are endless. And I'm going to keep using my Sony. I'm going to keep using my phone, my LGV40 that I shot my first feature film on, an award-winning film, The Center of Distance. Please watch it. Just go to thecenterofdistance.com. You'll find the Vimeo on demand link. It'll be on other streaming places pretty soon. But I'm so happy with this camera, and I'm so excited about what it's putting in front of me right now, because it's going to be my main A camera for this film. So thanks for watching. Take care of one another. Take care of yourselves. It's a crazy time in the world right now. Let's try to really come together.